This is Radio Health Journal. I'm Nancy Benson. This week, research at an exclusive prep school 50 years ago that would be called sexual abuse today.
Schools that were engaged in this, that were doing this, certainly should have known better. This was unethical research.
How far we've come in research ethics when Radio Health Journal returns.
I'm Reed Pence, the producer and host of Radio Health Journal. If you like listening to Radio Health Journal, you'll also like our sister show, Viewpoints, which covers a wide array of topics, from education to history to the environment. Here's a preview of what they're covering this week on Viewpoints.
The plastics industry has spent a lot of time and money and lobbying efforts on making us feel like if we see that chasing arrow symbol, that the packaging is recyclable, and as long as we put it in the bin, everything's going to be just fine.
The deepening global plastic crisis. Then,
the eastern population of monarchs has suffered about a 90% decline in the population over the last 20 years.
The beauty and great migration of the monarch butterfly. I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
Listen to Radio Health Journal and Viewpoints on your favorite radio station, and subscribe and listen anytime on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Also, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Radio Health Journal.
Back in 1965, a nervous 15-year-old named David Sklar had just transferred into an exclusive New England prep school, Phillips Exeter Academy, for his sophomore year. About 2 weeks after starting the fall term, he says all the new boys at the school, about 200 of them, were herded into a large conference room and sorted alphabetically. They didn't know why.
We were then sent into a smaller room, and in that smaller room, we were then told to take off all of our clothes. And then we were photographed, and we were photographed in 3 poses. One was straight on, and one was back, and one was sideways. And that was it. We weren't told why this was done or what was going to happen to these photographs, what they were being used for.
Sklar says the process happened every year, at least for a while, and it didn't seem to raise any eyebrows. Today, we'd call it abusive.
I would say it was a traumatic experience for me because I was new to the school and I was very, I would say, insecure. I was worried that I was going to flunk out of school and not be able to do the work. I came from a public school that was a pretty poor public school, and I was going to a private school that was very, very competitive. So I was always kind of anxious anyway to begin with, and then having to stand up naked in front of someone taking my photograph was, well, highly embarrassing and sort of humiliating.
Today, Sklar is Distinguished Professor Emeritus of Emergency Medicine at the University of New Mexico and former editor-in-chief of the journal Academic Medicine. He's also author of the book Atlas of Men, a novel based on what happened at Phillips Exeter. But he says the boys there were far from alone. He found out later that the same kind of pictures were being taken of entering freshmen at most Ivy League colleges and 7 sister schools like Vassar and Wellesley.
And it was written about in the New York Times as sort of an expose of this research that a professor named William Sheldon had been doing at several colleges, and similar pictures were being taken and people were also being photographed nude in the same way. And so I read about that, found out about it, and then talked with the school physician who I continued to know, I continued to stay in contact with after I graduated, and asked him about it. And I said, I wonder if these photographs that were taken have anything to do with that research study. And he said, oh, yes, we were part of that.
Sklar says students weren't asked for permission and nobody he knew of ever thought to object. Parents were never notified. And at some schools, it apparently went on for nearly 30 years.
Schools that were engaged in this, that were doing this, certainly should have known better. I think this was unethical research. And it was unfortunate. And I think that it's unclear how much it harmed people. Now I think if we found out that a bunch of 14 or 15-year-old boys or girls, were forced to strip naked and have themselves photographed, I think we'd be pretty appalled. I think at that time, it was still early in our understanding of the potential harm that research subjects might encounter. And it was a time when I think science was very well regarded as potentially having contributed to the end of World War II, the atomic bomb. As much as it was very dangerous, it also contributed to ending the war before a lot more people might have been killed. And I think there was sort of this pride in science and a willingness to kind of accept that although there might be some risk with science, that the benefits would outweigh the risks.
However, today you have to wonder. The research claimed to have a good purpose, but Sheldon's theory has long since been thrown out. It was called somatotyping,
where you could predict a person's personality or future for leadership, things like that, based upon the calculation of certain scores related to their body type that the person had. And there's 3 main body types that people usually can consider as sort of the main types. These are like I guess more or less the extremes. The ectomorph is the kind of tall, thin person. The mesomorph is more the kind of football player, very muscular type person. And then the endomorph is more like the Santa Claus type looking person. And the idea of the theory was that everybody has a certain amount of each of those main types of body tissues, and that by taking the pictures and then calculating what kind of a body type a person has, that you could then predict what would be their best, say, occupation or leadership potential or something like that.
Sklar says that according to the theory, people are fated to live a certain kind of life based on their body type, and there's not much anyone can do to change it. The theory also held that if a child's fate could be accurately predicted, they could be directed toward an appropriate occupation. However, the theory could also be twisted.
It really goes back even to the work, sadly, that the Nazis had been doing, this eugenics kind of theories where there were these ideas that you could breed the perfect human species by getting people with the right physical and mental characteristics together and getting them married and having children and so on. And that there was this sort of ideal type, ideal body type, ideal leader type.
Today, it seems incredible that such an experiment could ever be allowed. That's why now research needs to go through layers of approval before it starts. But for Sklar, the biggest lesson isn't how far we've come in protecting our kids. It's in how far we have yet to go to keep from labeling others or allowing it on ourselves.
You should not feel limited by certain characteristics that have been imposed upon you, particularly those from, in this case, it was, I think, very faulty scientific thinking. But even now, as we have genetics, and we're learning a lot about genetics, and some people may be told, genetically, you're not going to be quite smart enough to be a doctor. And I kind of feel like people who are motivated and have grit or perseverance are often going to overcome some of what other people might think are their limitations.
You can find out more about Dr. David Sklar and his book, Atlas of Men, as well as all our guests on our website, radiohealthjournal.org. Our studio producer is Jason Dickey. I'm Nancy Benson.
Radio Health Journal returns in just a moment.
During pregnancy and up to 3 months after delivery, a woman is at increased risk for a dangerous blood clot. A blood clot traveling from the legs to the lungs is one of the most common causes of pregnancy-related death in the United States. If a blood clot forms during pregnancy, it can harm the developing baby as well as the mother. That's why Dr. Andra James, high-risk pregnancy expert at Duke University, suggests that pregnant women talk with their doctor about blood clots.
Talk with your family about your health history and tell your doctor if you or anyone in your family has ever had a blood clot. Also, talk with your doctor about managing your risks and learn how to prevent a clot from forming.
The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention wants you to know the signs and symptoms of a blood clot. Arms or legs where a blood clot is formed may be warm to the touch, painful, swollen, or red or discolored. A blood clot in the lungs may produce difficulty breathing, chest pain that worsens with a deep breath, and coughing up blood. If you have any of these signs or symptoms, seek immediate medical care. Find out more from the National Blood Clot Alliance at stoptheclot.org.
Cardiovascular or CV disease is the #1 killer of adults in the U.S., and millions of people trying to reduce their risk of a heart attack or stroke may unknowingly be taking medications that are not proven nor FDA approved to reduce cardiovascular risk. Let's hear from cardiologist Dr. John Osborne.
Many people are unaware that after a failed outcome study, the FDA withdrew the approval of fenofibrate when added to statins as the risk outweighed the benefits to heart health. It's important to remember that statins, along with diet and exercise, can lower cardiovascular risk by about 25 to 35%, but persistent cardiovascular risk, which can lead to a life-threatening event, may remain. I would tell anyone still being prescribed fenofibrate, such as Tricor, Entera, and Trilipix, with a statin, to talk to their doctor about FDA-approved therapies for cardiovascular risk reduction.
To learn more and get clear on the facts, visit itscleartomenow.com. Again, that's itscleartomenow.com.
Blood clots affect about 900,000 Americans each year, resulting in about 100,000 deaths, more than from AIDS, breast cancer, and motor vehicle crashes combined. Hospitalization, surgery, and physical trauma are major factors that put you at risk for blood clots, according to Dr. Gregory Maynard, Chief Quality Officer at the University of California Davis Medical Center.
About half of all blood clots occur during a hospital stay or within 90 days of one. Most of these blood clots can be prevented, but fewer than half of hospital patients receive proper prevention measures. So before you're admitted to the hospital, talk with your doctor and develop a blood clot prevention plan.
Anyone can develop a blood clot. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention advises that you know the signs. Signs of a blood clot in the legs or arms include pain and swelling with skin that's warm to the touch, red or discolored. Signs of blood clots in your lungs are difficulty breathing, chest pain that worsens with a deep breath, coughing up blood, and a faster than normal or irregular heartbeat. If you think you have a blood clot, seek immediate medical care. Find out more from the National Blood Clot Alliance at stoptheclot.org.
And that's Radio Health Journal for this week. Radio Health Journal is a production of MediaTrax Communications. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more. And check Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify for a library of past programs. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and information about our guests at radiohealthjournal.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Radio Health Journal.
Coming up next week on Radio Health Journal.
In many ways, we may want to think of the pandemic as having hit the pause button on people's fertility. And the question is, will they take their finger off that button once the world returns to a little more of normal?
The COVID baby bust.
Then getting up to speed on colorectal cancer.
We're seeing sort of an alarming increase in patients under the age of 50. And several years ago, the American Cancer Society actually lowered the age of screening to 45 from 50, where it had been previously.
All that and more on Radio Health Journal.